I want to read to you some things I highlighted in Bart Ehrman's book, Did Jesus Exist? On page 178, under the heading, Irrelevancies in Historical Argument, Bart says, "It is true that we have far more manuscripts for the books of the New Testament than for Homer, Plato, Aristotle, Euripides, Cicero, and Marcus Aurelius, but that has absolutely no bearing on the question of whether the New Testament books can be trusted." On page 179, under the heading, The Gospels are highly problematic as historical sources, Bart says, "We do not have the original text of the Gospels, and there are places where we do not know what the authors originally said." He's going to contradict himself in just a minute. He says, "The Gospels are not authored by the persons named in their titles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but were written by people who were not followers of Jesus, living 40 to 60 years later in different parts of the world. The Gospels are full of discrepancies and contradictions, and the Gospels report historical events that can be shown not to have happened." Bart also says on page 179, "I think that these issues create genuine problems for the study of the New Testament, the history of the Christian church, and the life of the historical Jesus." On page 180, under the heading, We do not have the original texts of the Gospels, Bart says, "We are regrettably hindered in knowing what the authors of these books originally wrote." There's the contradiction. Earlier he said, in some cases we don't know what they originally wrote, but now he's admitting the truth, that we don't know at all what any of the original authors wrote. It's pure speculation. He also says we have thousands of manuscripts. The problem is that none of these manuscripts is the original copy produced by the author, and all of them contain certifiable mistakes. Page 181, under the heading, We do not know the authors of the Gospels, Bart says, "It is also true that we do not know who wrote the Gospels. Although they are attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these ascriptions are almost certainly wrong." Bart says of the 27 books found in the New Testament, only 8 of them almost certainly go back to the authors to whom they are traditionally ascribed. I disagree with that, but that's the mainstream scholarly position. Bart says either the others, besides those 8, are all misattributed to people who did not in fact write them, or they were actually forged, that is, written by authors claiming to be famous people while knowing full well they were someone else. The one thing we can say with some assurance about the gospel writers is that even though Jesus' own followers were lower-class Aramaic-speaking peasants from rural Galilee who were almost certainly illiterate, the Gospels were written by highly educated Greek-speaking Christians who lived outside of Palestine. That's page 182. Also on page 182, under the heading, The Gospels are filled with discrepancies and contradictions, Bart says, "The New Testament accounts of Jesus are filled with discrepancies and contradictions in matters both large and small." He says you simply need to compare very carefully any story found in the Gospels with the same story found in another Gospel. For example, the genealogy of Jesus found in Matthew and in Luke, he says they simply cannot be reconciled, and I agree. All the Gospels are contradictory regarding the stories of the birth, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. Now page 184, under the heading, The Gospels contain non-historical materials. Bart says the Gospels are riddled with other kinds of historical problems and that they relate events that almost certainly did not happen. According to Luke's story, a tax was imposed on all the world by Caesar Augustus, and that Joseph had to go to Bethlehem to register for the census. Bart says, and I agree, there is no way this can be historically correct. There was no worldwide or even empire-wide census in the days of Augustus, let alone a census in which everyone in the Roman Empire had to register in the town that their ancestors had come from thousands of years earlier. So too, it is completely implausible that when Jesus was put on trial at the end of his life, Pilate offered to release one of his 2 chief prisoners, Barabbas or Jesus. Bart says, this scene, like the census, almost certainly did not happen. The entirety of this book is Bart Ehrman showing that the Bible is not a credible source. But Bart goes on to say that none of the flaws and errors in the Bible matter when it comes to whether or not Jesus existed, even though we can't know the details of his life, death, burial, resurrection, or what he said because it's completely unreliable. Bart Ehrman concludes that Jesus must have existed in some form because he can't think of a reason why they would write so much about a person that didn't even exist. But I have the answer. Jesus was a fictional character created by the Romans in response to the Roman-Jewish wars. The Jews had a concept of a Messiah that would come and liberate Israel from the Roman Empire. This sparked rebellion, and the rebellion was put down by the Romans, and when the Romans found out what motivated their rebellion, they simply created a narrative with a fictional character to support their agenda. The Romans created Christianity and Jesus to replace Judaism.